Hi, and welcome to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon, and I am a relationship and dating expert, international speaker, and best-selling author of the book Your Behalf. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are not currently being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV, social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but this is their chance to express their opinion and their stories. And here today we have Dr. Nicholas Jenner, and we are going to talk about understanding codependency. Hi, Dr. Nicholas. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, please?
Yes, I've been a therapist for about 25 years. Turned to online therapy 15 years ago. And really my passion is to help codependents. I identify as a codependent myself. And I've seen in relationships how codependency is a big issue. Even though there's much more awareness nowadays about codependency, I think the medical profession in particular doesn't recognize it. And of course, there are a lot of therapists and psychologists who fail to recognize it or are centered on the DSM and don't really look at codependency.
Do you think it's because you were yourself codependent that you decided to, you have such an interest in it?
Yes, that was a big motivation, of course, because I'd suffered in relationships and I'd also created suffering, and I didn't really know why. Codependents are very much in denial about the way they feel. They are actually always portrayed in their own mind as the good guy, giving everything. I'm the one, sort of running the relationship, but I'm not getting back from you what I want. So, they're always in denial, and I was the same. And of course, it's not until you use some self-awareness and say to yourself, okay, well, why do I attract these people? Why do I behave the way I do in relationships, that you actually get to the core of it.
So explain codependency, because I think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily understand it. So just so that we're clear, what is it?
Well, codependency isn't a disorder, and it's not something that should appear in the DSM, which is the manual that all psychologists use. It's a behavioral problem which is created through disconnection with caregivers. Now, basically, we have to remember that our brain development is very much governed by the people that we grow up with. So brain development is all about the others, so to say. Now, in an ideal world, of course, the parents will give connection, they will guide, and they will observe, and they will help that child go through developmental phases. Now, we all know that doesn't happen generally, and parents are either busy, neglectful, abusive, or just don't know how to parent. Now, what does that do to the child? The child is constantly looking then for connection. And there is research and study to say that a child can tell whether its mother is trustworthy after 3 weeks after being born. Now, a child who isn't connected will bring in primary ego defenses. Now, that's basically one would be to try and attract the parents by being, mummy's little helper, or being the good girl or the good boy, either going to school and being academically gifted, or doing things around the house, or even refereeing between fights with parents. Their aim is, of course, is to do all of that to get the attention that they should get in the first place. As you go into your adult world, of course, there is a Freudian concept called repetition compulsion, which means that we choose relationships which try to solve the early relationship. And anybody who's been in a relationship can see the link there between maybe what their mother and father was like and some of the people they're attracted to. Now, our aim in that particular case is to fix those early relationships with the idea that if you can fix this person, none of that really matters. Just to run through some of the symptoms of codependency, you've got giving, sacrificing, you've got controlling, you've got people who enable, you've got people who people please. Controlling is a very, very interesting topic because narcissists are seen as controllers, but codependents are real controllers. They control through giving and expect in return. They control through victimization, being the victim, and they control through anger and rage sometimes.
you see, one of the things you said just earlier that I found really interesting, because I only discovered this 4 years ago. I don't even understand. I didn't know this before. When it's the bit when you said the child will know whether the mother is trustworthy within 3 weeks. Because when I was born premature and my mum nearly died. So she was sent at that end of the hospital, and I was sent at the other end of the hospital. And then I had some sort of an infection which turned into MRSA. So I was in an incubator without being able to be touched or anything. And then I had an allergic reaction to penicillin, so I was there for even longer. But what I found out through my auntie, for just a conversation about nothingness, is that my mum didn't get to see me for 2 weeks. And that explains so much, because as a child, I was really clingy. But then I've gone completely the other way, where I completely rebelled. And in my younger days, I used to be a real people pleaser, where now it's gone again, sort of thing. But it's interesting that you can, by just one conversation, you can make sense of so much.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I'm here, Sophie, of course, is to talk about a program that I wrote last year. And this goes into all of that. I mean, it's very, very interesting when you look at the life of a codependent, how that develops. I deal with a lot of codependents. I think probably 80% of my client bases are codependent. You usually, once they start talking, they come to the first consultation, they're starting to talk about, okay, well, their most common thing is, I've just finished a relationship with a narcissist, because they have this kind of idea in their mind, if they are codependent, they must have been with a narcissist. And then you can usually predict what kind of background they have, maybe the emotionally distant father and the overwhelmed mother, and it usually goes on from there. The thing is that, codependency, and it's always very, very important to recognize that because codependency isn't a disorder, there's no cure for codependency. You can't take a pill. You can't have 6 sessions of therapy and then say, okay, well, that's fine. Codependency has to be managed for the rest of your life. It's a behavior, it's a behavioral problem. And, you have to every day watch those symptoms, every day watch those triggers. And I would say that you're only actually one thought away from a relapse, if you're in a relationship. And in that program I wrote, I go from where does it all start to how you can deal with it, and the ultimate holy grail of codependency, which is individuality.
So, because the way you're just talking, and I'm thinking of people I've dealt with and people that I know, is everybody codependent in one way or another?
Well, there are some studies, of course, that say that a large majority of the global population is codependent in some way. And let's also put that on the table. It's not only in relationships, it can be at work, it can be with children,
friends, family,
everything. Now, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, because of course we wouldn't like to portray that every single parenting experience is negative. But there are lots of people who are codependent, and we mustn't forget also that there are people who are also avoidant codependent, which means that they stay away from relationships because they worry about some of that depth that happens when they get into a relationship. And codependents tend to be codependent when they're in a relationship, but avoidant codependent when they're out of one. I've heard people say many times, I'm never going to have another relationship, until, of course, they do.
Yeah. Does it only stem from childhood, or can it be, like, inverted brackets, a learned behavior later on in life, or be a both?
Well, I mean, I would suggest that the vast majority of people who are codependent started that process in their childhood. It's the way the brain develops, it's the way a child develops. It's the way we learn about relationships, and it's based on 2 types of trauma: relational trauma, that means your relationship with your caregivers, and also developmental trauma, how you go through your. But it can be said that if you have, for example, the insecure or anxious attachment, and you involve yourself with someone who has a secure attachment, you can change that. And the other way around, of course. If you have a secure attachment and you are really involved with someone who is anxious codependent, then maybe there could be a change in that.
So how can you tell the difference? I mean, mainly in yourself, rather than, talking to somebody, because you would be able to tell straight away how or what the difference is between being caring and being codependent.
There's a very fine line. People who care about others, who are altruistic, of course, they will do things for people without an expectation of return. And this is the big difference between a codependent and someone who is caring. They will go and do things for people, they won't expect that person to do anything back. Now, you've got to remember that codependency is a very intense, enmeshed kind of concept. So, a codependent gets in there, they basically take over somebody's life. They do everything. They anticipate what this person wants. They martyr themselves. But the price for that is very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
You need to give me devotion. Now, the thing about this is that, because of the type of childhood they've had, when they've had emotionally distant parents, maybe, that's the kind of people they're attracted to. So this cycle goes on of these people who don't want to be attached, but are with people who are trying to suck them in a codependent way. So this cycle of push-pull goes on in the relationship all the way through.
I've got a weird question. What about pets? Can cats and dogs have similar? Because as you were talking just now, I wasn't thinking of people. I was thinking of my cat, if I'm honest.
Well, you've got to remember that the humans are the only species on this planet who have developed more advanced executive function. Most animals are very much in what we call the reptilian brain, which means that they do enough to survive for one day.
Yeah.
Now, dogs, of course, and cats, in different ways, they adapt to their environment to make sure that they survive for that one day. So, dogs are all over you, and they're aggressive, and they fight for their environment to survive. Now, even though many dog lovers, and I'm one of them, would say that their dog loves them, the dog would not experience love in the same way that a human would, because it doesn't have that executive function that we have. Cats are notorious, of course. They take what they need and they leave the rest. So that's their way of surviving.
Fair enough. And going back to actual humans, what would you say, what are some early signs that it might be you, sort of thing, that is codependent, or early signs that you could spot in a relationship with somebody new?
It's very difficult to begin with, because if you're in a new relationship with somebody, you're going through.
Don't really know them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you don't know them. You're going through the infatuation and honeymoon period, and of course, where everybody is okay. When you get into what we call the contemplation phase, which is whether you're deciding whether the relationship works for you or not, you can see some signs of codependency. I want to be with you all the time. There could be some jealousy. There could be some control. There could be some victim kind of behavior going on. And they are red flags for codependency. And it goes really on the other end of the spectrum of what a healthy relationship is. I've always described a healthy relationship as two quite rounded individuals who have their own social circle, friends, and their own ambitions, who come together and create a space for the relationship, quality me and us time. Codependency is completely the opposite to that. Codependents jump out of their individual circle and try to dominate the relationship circle and expect the other person to do the same.
So let's say someone's listening to this. Well, actually, no, let's put that question to you in a minute. One of my things at the moment that does annoy me slightly, to put it mildly, is how many people just look for red flags and don't actually look for the good in a person.
Yep.
And unfortunately, not unfortunately, but kind of what we're saying, we say, oh, look out for all of these things. I feel there's a danger in that, but people are never satisfied.
Yes, I agree, Sophie. The unfortunate thing is, though, that you can't make judgments about anybody, good or bad, in the honeymoon period. You know that yourself.
Yeah.
You have to wait until the real person emerges. When I deal with people who are looking for new relationships, of course, the one piece of advice I give them is, please take it slow. Don't make any big decisions about somebody in the honeymoon period, which can be up to a year. Don't marry them. Don't buy a house with them. Don't have kids with them, because you don't know who you're dealing with. It's really a case of going into that period with an open mind. Treating it a little bit like, okay, we're going to have some fun. We're going to get to know each other. Progressively let that relationship go on a trip or meet the parents, all that kind of stuff. But don't be too anxious about, okay, well, there's a narcissist on the corner and things like that. But you do have to wait until the real person comes out. And I'll give you a little example. A lady said to me many years ago, She met this guy and they moved in within 2 weeks. Now, for about 3 to 4 months, he made her coffee every day. So every day she laid in bed and coffee came. Now, after about 4 months, it stopped. And she said, "Oh, where's my coffee?" He said, "What do you want? I've made it to you for four months. What about making me coffee?" So then you absolutely know that the honeymoon period is over, and you can assess who that is.
Question. I'm full of questions today.
Good.
Obviously, I know that you live in France, so I will ask that question first. Have you heard of a series called Married at First Sight?
I've heard of it, but I'm not going to say that I've watched it.
Watched it. Okay, so the upshot is that it's a social experiment where, as the title says, some people are matched to marry at first sight, and then they live together for 3 months. And what is being said is that basically the process of getting to know each other, all the rest of it, that would take a year, takes 3 months, because we put them through challenges and force them to ask really difficult, honest questions, that sort of stuff. Can you bypass time, in your opinion?
Well, it depends on you as an individual. I mean, if we're going back to codependency, of course, a codependent will adapt to their whole personality and approach to somebody to make that work. So if you put a codependent into that situation, married at first sight, they will see what that person needs, and they will make it happen. So that doesn't mean they're going to be happy, and it doesn't mean that the relationship will sustain itself.
It would work.
It would work. But if you get to people who really look at things in a socially traditional way, that kind of thing is not going to work. You're going to get to know somebody when you've made the biggest commitment that you'll ever make in your life, to marry someone, and marrying someone that you know nothing about is not likely to work, unless, of course, there would be the odd occasion when it would work. But then nothing about our brain development or the way our mind works says that will work.
Okay. So going back to my original question before I went on a few tangents, which was, let's say someone is listening to this and they're thinking, okay, so I'm listening and actually I can see signs of codependency in me. What do I do next?
Well, the first stage of recognizing codependency is exactly that: becoming self-aware that you are codependent. As I said earlier on, and I said, and of course in the program, self-awareness is the first thing. How do you become self-aware? You have to look inside. You have to look inside. You have to gain the knowledge of what codependency is, and then you have to work on it. Working on it has a set program. But first of all, you have to be self-aware. You have to watch your symptoms. You have to watch your patterns. You have to look at your patterns over the past. And then you have to have, which is the biggest thing, you have to have a willingness to take action. Because many people will sit and they'll say, yes, I'm codependent, but they won't do anything about it, because it's an easy life to be a codependent. You just give everything you have, and then you just hope that something comes back at some point.
Easy, but it can't be that fulfilling.
It's not fulfilling at all. I've been in that situation, Sophie. I've been, like I said, I consider myself a codependent, and I've had some disasters in my life where, I just basically haven't bothered to be an individual within that relationship. I've just gone with the flow, and I've ended up unhappy.
It's interesting what you just said, because I have an ex-boyfriend who, is that. He had one friend that I knew of and I never met. And every time he got, I was split up some 14, 15 years ago, potentially. So it's a long time ago. But every single girlfriend he's had since then has followed the same pattern as it did with me, which is that basically my life became his life.
Yep.
Not so much that his friends became my friend. No, my friend became his friends. It was just there.
Yep.
And would you say that's more of a man thing, or is it just the same regardless of gender?
Well, in my experience of dealing with codependence, men tend to be more controlling when they're codependent, which means that they use things like the drama triangle, of course, to fix somebody or attempt to fix somebody, and then get slightly angry or rageful when that doesn't happen, and then they become the victim. It's all about being rescued and rescuing.
Yeah.
Women who naturally try to find harmony and connection with people will more likely be enabling codependence, be people-pleasing codependence, and that kind of thing. Though, that's not set in stone. Of course, that could be...
Yeah. Just an observation.
I also know men who are very enabling and people pleasing.
I have noticed, and I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, again, observation, a lot of people seem to confuse codependency with love or loyalty or both, which would be my mother as well. I could put in that category. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think that question ties into a lot of things we said today. One, codependents see themselves as good guys. They're the ones then. They're not narcissists, so they're on the other end of the scale. So that for them is good enough. Secondly, they've never known any differently. How to behave differently. This is what they learned in their childhood. They've learned that this is the way that you connect with people, and they've continued that on. I've heard terms like the love addiction. I actually changed that term to love management, because that's what it is. Though you can see some signs of addiction in codependence, I think basically a codependent comes into a relationship and tries to manage people. And that's what codependency is all about. And they consider that love, but love, codependent love is not love, it's control. Make that very clear. Codependent love is not love, it's control.
Interesting. It's not the rule, it's the wrong term. I'll use rule, even if it's the wrong term. What's the role of self-worth in all of this? Is self-worth at the root of, apart from, what you said about the brain development and stuff, but where's self-worth in all of this?
Well, it's a very important factor, because codependents generally don't have any. They see their value through what they do with other people. So inner work is very alien to codependence. And even when they become self-aware, self-esteem issues and self-worth issues generally come up, because most codependents will be dealing with what we call toxic shame. Toxic shame is what you pick up from your parents when you believe that you can't connect with them, but your brain is not developed enough to say, well, they're a couple of and they don't know what they're doing. So you take it back on yourself and say, well, I'm not good enough to be able to connect with them. A very primary kind of function that children have. So that turns into toxic shame, that I'm not good enough to actually deal with these people. And of course, that gets transferred onto other people.
Which, an observation again that I've seen throughout. You can have very good parents, you don't get raped, abused, you know what I mean? You have a nice, happy childhood as it comes, sort of thing. But regardless of that, we all end up with issues of some kind.
Well, what you've said there, Sophie, is the basic. I mean, you shouldn't be raped and abused and beaten. Those kind of things happening in childhood and have their own kind of issues going on. But I mean, it's more about emotional connection. If you look at Maslow's triangle of needs, you've got the bottom layer is always about shelter,
Safety.
food, clothing. I mean, most parents will provide that. But what they need, what children really need, is further up that scale. It means connection, it means guidance, it means showing, and actually making the difference when you're parenting between the child and what the child does. Many people have, do things to get a return because they've been taught, they're prized for the things that they do and not who they are.
Is it things like not saying the child is naughty, but that was naughty behaviour, that sort of thing?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Which is what I do with a cat. So then you've got the role of perception, because obviously you might do something that comes from the right intention, but someone else might think that he doesn't, or that he doesn't go for them, or whatever. So how on earth do you manage to parent properly going forward so that sort of thing doesn't happen? Is it even possible?
Well, I mean, there are many factors there that could answer that question. I mean, the first one would be generational trauma, of course. Tend to do is we tend to parent the way that we were parented, unless we are aware that was not the best way to do it.
So we do the opposite sort of thing.
But parenting isn't rocket science. I mean, children need attention, they need observation, they need guidance, and they need boundaries and limits.
Yeah.
In this fast-paced world that we live in, and I'm just want to add another thing to that. They need connection, with their parents, not with a nanny, not with a babysitter, but with the biological parents. And the thing is that children need to feel that they are part of, the parent's life, not that they have to adapt to the parent's life. What we have to remember too is that children come into this world very egotistically. And that has to be, because if they don't scream, they don't cry, they don't look for attention.
Not fed, as it were.
And it's the parent's job to show the child as it gets older that the parent, will look after them, but they've also got other things too. So it also brings a sense of independence, and that moves from the mother to the father at some stage. But many parents are either busy, sick, not there, or not there mentally, not there physically. And all of that goes by the wayside, unfortunately.
Okay. What about the effect on the other person, if we take it back to a romantic relationship, shall we say? What are the effects on the other person? And can they, I'd say probably not, because it's not going to be well received, how can they point out that there may be an issue?
Well, it depends on the kind of person who is with a codependent. There are some people, of course, who actually like being with codependents because of the giving that they give all the time, and they don't give back. And you've got to remember that codependents are generally attracted to people who are emotionally distant, mainly because that mirrors their childhood, but secondly, it also stops them feeling vulnerable. When somebody is moving away from them, they don't need to have that person in their face. Very interestingly, when you talk to people who are looking for relationships, they always see codependents seem to be attracted to people who generally need fixing, like kind of the bad boys and things like that. But if they've got someone coming from the other direction who really wants to connect with them, they're not interested. But they call those people boring, or
That's me in my 20s.
Yes, and because they're not used to that kind of relationship. They're not used to trying to connect with them. What people can say, I mean, of course, it's a very dodgy trying to diagnose somebody based on what you might read on the internet or something. But I mean, if it goes with general relationships generally. If you are unhappy about any aspect of a relationship, you have to discuss it and perhaps get professional help if that doesn't work.
Yeah. What about, as a codependent, the self-talk? Because that must be even, I mean, most people beat themselves up in their own head anyway, but that must be even stronger, as it were.
Well, yes, the self-talk of a codependent is all around what you need to do to maintain the relationship, maintain that connection with the other person. The self-talk is very, okay, what do I need to do? And of course, there's lots of shame and guilt attached to it, and particularly if they start thinking about themselves. And it's not easy to be a codependent because, of course, the last person you do think about is yourself. What do I need? If you ask a codependent what they need, they probably wouldn't be able to answer that. Mm-hmm. They'll tell you what they've read in a book. Oh, I need this and I need that, but practicing it is very, very difficult.
Well, we're getting towards the end of our time together. Great. So can you share one last pearl of wisdom, please?
Well, the only thing I can say to you is what I say all the time to codependents. If you feel you are codependent, you need to work on it. It's not going to go away. It's going to, in fact, get worse. And don't settle for second best. There is a life ahead of you that you can have an individual life away from codependency if you're willing to face the issue. And that's what I've tried to do in that program, is work right through that area. People can do that on their own without, they can listen to the audio, they can do the exercises and things like that.
And to make it because I think a lot of people don't want to do that kind of work because they're scared it's difficult and is going to bring up stuff they don't want to be brought up.
Absolutely, and nothing is easy. Of course, as I said earlier in our talk today, it's much easier to stay codependent because you're stuck in that rut. You think that the relationship is fine. You think you love somebody, but I mean, you've got an implosion waiting for you. Mm-hmm. Once you're codependent and you throw all of that power to this other person, of course, you're at their whim. And as we've seen, many codependents are destroyed when relationships finish. They can't be on their own, and then that's what usually prompts them to come to therapy. But I mean, it shouldn't take a heartbreak to start that.
Right. Thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you.
And for everybody else, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe and give us a review. But more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.